All right, so it looks like we have about 18 folks on the line right now. We are about 1 minute past. Kathy, let me know if we should give it another minute or two before we get kicked off.
Yeah, I mean, 18 is a good number. I'd probably go ahead and kick it off.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Tiffany. I'm with the HPE North America channel. We're excited to have you guys here on board for this Lunch and Learn with WEI. And I just want to start today's call off with a quick welcome and go over some housekeeping items. So the main thing to know is that today's call is a meeting. It's not a webinar, so you do have the ability to come on and off mute. I will ask that for any questions you have, go ahead and drop them in the chat box, and then our presenters will address them as we go along for today's session. The next thing I would like to cover is the introductions of today's guest speakers. So we have a great lineup. We first have Shane Garrett, WEI Senior Vice President of Sales. Shane, do you want to kick off with any words to start the session?
Besides that picture needs to be replaced pretty quickly, but that's other than that's all good. I can't help but see Peter Griffin when I look at that picture, but that's just me and the way my mind works. So no, I want to thank everybody for their time today. I know nobody's at a loss for virtual meetings and content these days, so I appreciate you guys spending time with us, and I look forward to hearing what James has to say. I've had the pleasure of meeting James and listening to this, and it's a unique opportunity, so I do appreciate his time as well.
Thanks, Shane. And yeah, so that's a good lead in. Our next session, or our next speaker, is James Morrison. He is the Distinguished Technologist for Cybersecurity here with HPE, former FBI. Very intelligent speaker. Excited to have him on the line today. James, any initial words from you?
No, just again, thank you for the opportunity. I want to kind of echo what Shane said. You know, we have a lot of webinars going on, and sometimes I think we're in webinar fatigue, but you know, thank you for taking the time, and I hope you'll bring something out of it that will help you sort of, you know, start asking, at the minimum, asking questions as to what's next and what do you want to do.
Thanks, James. Yes, good point. So now we can go ahead and I'll move on to the next slide. Shane, let me know if you would like to share your screen for your slides, or if you just want to talk to it. Oh, and I think you are on mute.
That's the webinar fatigue.
Yeah, Zoom rules, right?
Yeah. So you know, I won't share a slide. I see the list of attendees, and I recognize a lot of the names. And again, I thank you all for your patronage, and I thank you for taking the time today. For those that don't know us, WI, we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. We've been in the industry a long time, and really our goal is to build lasting relationships, not just with our customers and our partners, but with our communities, right? And now's a good time to lean in on that and focus on that, and that's what we do. As it relates to security, network and security today in this conversation, a lot of you folks understand what we do there, and I just welcome the opportunity to educate you and introduce you to our technical teams when we have some time. So that was it. I want to thank you for your time. Again, I recognize a lot of the names here, and you've all had the pleasure of listening to me talk about things, so I won't take too much of the time. I want to thank James for his service. He spent 8 years in the Air Force as well. I want to thank him for that. And, you know, I think we're all very excited to listen to this and to really ask questions and talk about what's next as it relates to these threats and COVID and all the things that we all have to deal with in our businesses. So I just thank you for the opportunity and looking forward to it.
Thank you, Shane. So with that, James, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. I will stop sharing my screen if you would like to go ahead and pull up your slides.
All right. Y'all see that? The security in the COVID world?
Looks great.
All right, sweet. So yeah, thank you, Shane, for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity. You know, I kind of laugh. You know, eight years in the military. I think it feels like a lifetime ago. Over this shoulder, you can see the Mount Pinatubo exploded in June 15 of '91, and I was there and scared out of my mind, like a lot of kids, I guess, at that time. But what's interesting is this world we live in, this COVID-19 world. I've often said that this is the largest unplanned IT transformation in the history of IT. And we may not have thought about that, but when we were, in January, maybe in December, when we were setting plans for going forward, I don't think any of us had planned in, that we were going to be shut down and working from home for 90 days. And I think what's going to be interesting going forward is what lessons we learned. And so I want to start by encouraging you right there to begin with, is we have a lot of lessons that we've learned through this COVID pandemic that may be transformational going forward. Whether it's work from home opportunities, whether it's cloud enablement, whatever it may be, I think there's a lot of opportunity. Don't romanticize this going forward. I often equate it to the idea of having kids. When we had kids, when you're in the middle of it, you remember it was sometimes very painful and you weren't getting any sleep and all those kind of things were happening. And then much later we romanticize how, all of our kids were, the perfect children. But in doing that, we end up making mistakes that we don't want to make. So let's learn the lessons. Let's move forward with those lessons under our belt. HPE's always had the idea of talking about the enterprise of the future. And it was edge-centric, cloud-enabled, and data-driven. And this is completely true today. We are in this world now where the edge has pushed closer to, not just our customers, but also to our employees. And right now, going on is HPE's Discover event. And this is the first time we've ever held Discover virtual. So if you have an opportunity, you can join in and see what's being talked about. Because it's fascinating hearing, some very intelligent people talk about data at the edge. And I'm going to show you kind of what we're going to do at the edge. Cloud enabled. I've been in IT a long time, 22 years FBI, 8 years military. And even before that, in the mid 80s, I was learning to program. And I was an early programmer in COBOL and Pascal and Fortran. And yes, I'm old. And the first computers I worked on were the Tandy Radio Shacks and the Timex Sinclairs. But when cloud first started coming out, everybody kind of looked at it as, is this going to save me money? And I think we're going to have a slight change in that idea. Is it always about saving money, or is it about leveraging our data better? Is it about using cloud to transform the way we do business? And one of the examples I talk about there is like when I was doing Windows NT and Novell back in the 90s, we were doing transformations of pulling people into the digital workplace. And a lot of times what we did is we took existing pen and paper processes and just pulled them into a digital environment. And a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you can see Excel spreadsheets that look exactly like a piece of paper that you have. And that just shows that we really didn't do an IT transformation. We did a digital translation. And so I think we have a golden opportunity here to do a transformation into maybe cloud. And it could be, I think you're going to see more hybrid cloud. I don't think most companies are going to deploy completely into a public cloud. But I think cloud from a hybrid environment, and what do I need to keep private? What do I need to allow to stay public? And then data driven. When I talk about security, security has to be data driven. And the world we live in has to be built around that because data is growing at an exponential rate. 175 zettabytes by 2025. What's really impressive about that data number, and I kind of go back to where I started, in 1981, the Timex Sinclair was one of the first computers sold in the United States, had 2K of RAM. To buy an additional 2K of RAM, you had to spend like $1,000. The first hard drive that we bought for our Tandy Radio Shacks was a 5 meg drive, and it would cost well over $1,000 in 1985. Data is becoming cheaper, but in that, our data is also exploding. And how do we manage that data? How do we process that data? And from my standpoint, how do we secure it? Because 70% of this data number you see, this 175 zettabytes, is being generated from outside of our data centers. So we have to know how to secure the data all the way at the edge, but then also protect that data all the way inside into our data centers. So digital transformations are going to start shifting IT focus. And one of those questions is the idea of ops and to applications. I talk to a lot of IoT. I'm here in the Houston area, and I've done a lot of cybersecurity in oil and gas and petrochemical and OT and IoT environments are often out of date. And I've even talked to a lot of financial organizations where they're still running applications on Windows XP or older. And the problem with that is that how do we secure a operating system or a process that isn't even supported anymore? And one of those ideas is the idea of containerization and as we look at application development. And how do we do this faster, right? Because we aren't living in a world today where downtime is acceptable. I can remember back in the military days, we were doing circuits and the old data circuits. If we had 95 to 98% of uptime on a circuit, we felt we were doing pretty good. Today's world, that doesn't work anymore. We're talking 5 nines of uptime, 7 nines, and even in some cases 100%. So application development going forward has to be able to do it fast, has to be able to do it without downtime, and be able to do it in a way that the end user you don't have a change of their experience. So I think I think you're gonna see a lot of that going forward. And so one of the things that's kind of cool, and I'll be honest, this was announced at Discover yesterday, and I'm completely in the dark about it. We're a large organization, and we have a new software portfolio that will help transform apps, data, and operations. And I think it's going to be very interesting going forward. And I just wanted to throw it out there because I'm actually been watching videos and trying to learn more about it too. But it's the idea is helping us run, manage, control, secure apps, data from the edge all the way to the cloud. And that's really where HPE has built its mindset. We feel by 2022, everything should be in the cloud and offered as a service in the cloud. And when that starts happening, I think it's going to have a very transformational effect on companies. But again, I'm a security guy. If I have data and my data is flowing, I have to have security. Can I trust that data? Can I trust the resilience of that data every place I see it? And this is, I think, going to have a large conversation as well. So one of the things I look at is I'm a systems person. I did systems troubleshooting in the Air Force. I was a system administrator on old DEC Ultrix and Unix machines and all that kind of stuff. But data is your currency. From a corporate standpoint, your data is your currency. So when somebody says I'm securing the network, I want us to take a slightly different tack on that. Let's instead say we're securing the data, because in the end, I don't necessarily care if my firewall or my router or even a printer gets infected, as much as I don't want to lose my data or the access to my data. And so when we talk about ransomware, for example, really the whole idea of ransomware is to deny you access to your data. And so that loss of function is the weapon we see. So let's become more data-centric in cybersecurity, but we've also got to make sure I have a holistic approach to the idea of security. And so one of the things we talk about within HPE is protecting, detecting, and recovery. How can I protect my endpoints? How can I protect my applications and my hardware? And how many new vulnerabilities do we live in? And I mean, this is a golden example is when we look at the pushing people to home networks. How are people connecting into to the home network? Are they doing it through VPN? Are they doing it through Citrix? Because when we look at a VPN tunnel, for example, the VPN tunnel creates a secure network connection between that end computer and our server. But what we're actually doing is we're connecting those home networks into our corporate environment. And so from a cybersecurity standpoint, we often say, cybersecurity, I accept the security of the least secure network we connect to. So are you willing to accept the security of more home networks? Because that's really what we're doing in VPN access. And having an understanding of that, because those are new vulnerabilities. So IoT devices on home networks, whether it's a Ring doorbell or whether it's an Alexa device or all of those things, there are new vulnerabilities that we have because of just the world we live in. Detection. How will I detect an intruder and deter them? And that's got to be part of our conversation. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then recovery. One of the most interesting things I've seen from recovery, and I'll be honest right now with ransomware. With ransomware, the most secure way you can prevent or at least recover from ransomware is going to be through a proper backup mechanism. Statistically, 77% of backups fail when you need them. And that could be whether it's a true ransomware attack or it could be through another event that you need to go back to your backups. So making sure that your backups are resilient, making sure that your backups are somewhat hidden from the attackers. Because the attacker is going to come into your network and they're going to be in there for a while. And one of the things they're going to look at is, where are your backups? And can I delete them or encrypt them prior to you being able to access them? So recovery has to be kind of built into that as well. So why is cybercrime a thing? It's very simple. 75% of this is money motivated, maybe even inside 80%. 98% of the attacks that are going to come after you, especially in a ransomware type environment, are going to ask for Bitcoin or some sort of cryptocurrency as payment. The main reason is that once that money is put into that cryptocurrency, the odds of being able to track it go down dramatically. Rule number 1 of cybercrime: everybody's a target. I want you to understand that if there's one takeaway I want every one of you to understand, is that every one of you is a target, and I don't care what industry you have. I can talk about any vertical. I don't care whether it's manufacturing, whether it's construction, retail, healthcare, oil and gas, financial, you name it. I mean, I do a lot of talks into retirement homes, schools, municipalities. Everyone's a target, except that. So moving forward, last year, $2 trillion of losses for cybercrime. That number could be as high as $6 trillion next year. What that means is that the cyber criminals will continue to do this as long as it's lucrative. So we have to start making this less lucrative and start, understanding that global crime and cybercrime is only going to continue to escalate until we stop paying the ransom, until we stop, allowing them the luxury of stealing my data and finding new revenue streams, because that's what we're seeing now as well. The Maze ransomware, which is a new variant that came out late last year, they will steal your data, then they will encrypt your data. And here's what they're going to do. They're going to contact you and say, pay the ransom. Okay, your choice, business decision. Then they're going to contact you and say, oh, by the way, we also stole your data. Are you going to pay to get that data back or prevent it from going public? That's your choice. The third thing we've started to see, and this is kind of crazy, is we've actually seen the criminals start turning people into authorities. They will actually report you to an oversight or compliance authority. CCPA, which is the most restrictive compliance law in the United States, California Consumer Privacy Act, goes into law on 1 July. New York just passed the New York Shield law, which changes some of the breach notification requirements. And understand this, ransomware in most breach notification laws is considered a breach. You will have to report that. So a lot of companies have hidden their ransomware attacks because they either interpreted that it didn't mean a breach, or they felt that if they could hide, they wouldn't have that responsibility. I just think that's a really bad idea, and we got to go forward. But the problem is, and this is where HPE and companies like WEI have to have a better understanding, is the budgets remain flat. So it's crucial for us to be able to build a relationship with you and help you transform in the way that helps you get to where you want to go. So let's say your IT transformation is a cloud environment. You're going into a hybrid cloud. Let's make sure we're spending the money in the right place, because the world we live in, I call it the shiny light syndrome. We see a lot of environments where you'll go out, and I was at RSA right before this all kind of went crazy. RSA is all about shiny lights. And I know a lot of CEOs and CIOs that walk through that and go, ooh, ah, and they fall for some of that marketing. We need to start making sure that the security products that we're deploying are giving us true return on investment and actually helping us have positive value. So you can see here, a lot of us spend, most of our money is on advanced perimeter controls. And don't get me wrong, firewalls and border routers are crucial to our environment, but they're not the end-all be-all. I can't tell you the number of companies that are deploying next-generation firewalls, and that's their entire security mechanism. And you're like, okay, well, what else? What about defense in depth? What about intelligence systems, machine learning, behavioral analytics, access and control? Well, we'll get there. Well, I think the time for us to start at least having conversations and mapping it out are now. And I'll actually talk about, some conversations there. And I do a lot of blogging. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I try to talk about relevant topics. And one of the questions I asked yesterday was, when will cybersecurity become the conversation you need to have? Because if you're not having that conversation now, the criminal could already be in your network. They could already be doing damage. And so on Monday, the Wall Street Journal, actually, I think this may have been released on Friday, but they had a report talking about the industries most vulnerable to cyber attacks and why. And I found it a fascinating read. It's kind of funny. I know I'm getting middle-aged when I'm watching Masterpiece Theater and I'm reading the Wall Street Journal. But here I am, and that's where I've become. Because some of the takeaways I brought out of this report were ransomware. 80% of companies view it as a high risk, but only 70% felt they were prepared to deal with it. There's a gap there, right? How are you going to deal with ransomware? What is your mechanism? Are you looking at how you want to evaluate it? One of the biggest things you can look at is the idea, do you have an intrusion detection plan or intrusion response plan? I read and there's actually a subsequent report that came out that said most companies have an incident response plan. There's a large number, but 2/3 of them have never tested it. Well, that doesn't do you any good if you don't test your incident response plan. And the story I tell about that is when I was in the Air Force, I was at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and I had been there about 2 weeks, and they were running exercises. And if you've been in the military, you know they love to run these exercises. Well, I walked outside on a security sweep, and there's a purple smoke bomb sitting on our front porch. And I walked in, I said, hey, we got a smoke bomb. And before we had a chance to look it up, a guy walked in with a sign on his thing that said exercise coordinator, and he said, who's in charge? And he said, one of our guys raised his hand and said, you're dead. And he hung a sign around his neck. And there were 11 of us on shift. He killed the first 10 people of rank on that shift until I was the only one remaining. And he said, you are now the only person surviving in here. What do you do? And I said, I don't know. And he said, you guys fail. And the point of that was that every person has a responsibility to know what their job is and their role is, or to know where the book is to go find out what to do. It's crucial. Having a cybersecurity program. Less than 2/3 of companies actually have one. Have a program. You need to appoint a security officer. I know it's another person, a CISO or whatever you want to call them, but you have to have a security officer. And I would strongly encourage that security officer not to report to the CIO. And this is always contentious because most security officers do report to CIOs, but having them report to something like a chief risk officer allows them to run a cybersecurity program in parallel with your CIO. And a lot of times you're going to actually find that you're working to the same measures and the same needs. Other times they may be contrary, but I'm a strong advocate of that, and I could go into long lengths about that. Cyber insurance. You have to have cyber insurance in today's world. One of the things about cyber insurance is that insurance policy will require you to do certain things to make sure that you are more prepared. They will require things like executive level cybersecurity training, and they will help improve that overall. They will help with incident response and helping you come up with incident response companies. And so those are all things I think that are very important. And then supply chain. It is a threat. Supply chain is a threat, whether it's hardware supply or whether it's software suppliers. I only have to point back to the Target attack of 2013, where their intrusion came in through a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company that had been hacked, and they were able to use that supply chain to actually attack the network. What's really interesting about supply chain from that standpoint is only 15% of companies will report a breach up their supply chain or down their supply chain. So you have lots of risk. And so we need to find a better way to quantify and qualify our supply chain risk. And what's interesting from the report is manufacturers, retail, and government agencies were at high risk. All right, so I've set the stage. We're scared, right? Well, at least we're aware. Cyber threats are everywhere. They're never gonna go away. We need to find a better way of mitigating these threats through innovation. And so what HPE came up with is this idea of the holistic enterprise security architecture. So people, processes, policy, products, and proof. The 5 Ps, we often talk about that. But things like risk compliance. What is your compliance mechanism? What I think is very interesting about your security domain is every one of you are unique, okay? So we have to have a better understanding of every workplace we work at, every enterprise we go into has a unique set of needs. Your data is unique, your physical security is unique, your compliance is unique. So we don't do cookie cutter. We help you build, and WEI will also help you build to your need and help you kind of develop a program going forward. So from an HPE standpoint, one of the things we've looked at is how do we kind of feed into that security mechanism? And so we kind of have a two-pronged approach. From HPE, and I'm actually going to split HPE into two separate companies, and we'll talk about that. HPE Enterprise server manufacturer and the ARUBA manufacturer, and we'll talk about why those are different. So data center security, how do I protect your data? Your data exists in three stages: at rest, in flight, and in use. I have to be able to protect the data in all three of those, whether it's bulk encryption at rest, whether it's VPN type access or TLS encryption. And there's a new TLS 1.3 out, and there's a lot of question as to whether I should or should not use it. Or in the data in use, data in RAM, data in cache, those are places that we've seen being able to be attacked, data sitting in an environment like that. So in addition, how do I secure your platform? Can you trust the data that's coming off your platform? Is the data that's coming off that platform resilient? And do I have visibility and control of my platform so that should something happen, I can take appropriate actions? But the biggest thing about security is I have to be able to do everything without compromising performance. I can remember in the early 2000s when we were starting to deploy host-based firewalls, and you'd get an end user calling and saying, my machine is so slow now, I need this taken off. And executive management would support that because whatever we're doing on a day-to-day operation has to continue, and that has to be the most important. I cannot affect end user environment. So what we looked at was, we always felt from an HPE standpoint is that security is only as strong as the layer below it. Most security mechanisms will sit up at the apps, the OS, maybe a virtual machine, but very rarely do they ever extend down into the hypervisor, the BIOS, and the CPU. So through HPE, some of the things I'll talk about real quickly, we've created a fingerprint on every one of our servers that will help us establish a chain of trust that can then be leveraged all the way up the boot stack and into the application layer. And what we do here is that this is the HPE zero trust model. If I can guarantee the security of my hardware, I can then take that same fingerprint and extend that into my firmware, my OS, and my apps. But in addition, what if I can take that same hardware and tie its security to the hardware of other servers across my environment all the way to the edge? And so what HPE has done is that we take a custom HPE chip, and when a server is created, we take a SHA-512 hash of that firmware, write it into that custom chip, that SHA hash becomes a fingerprint for every stage of the boot process. Now, we were the first to come up with this idea. 2017, we deployed what we call the Silicon Root of Trust. Now, recently, one of our competitors has created something called the Hardware Root of Trust, which does a very similar process. However, two big differences. Number one, the custom HPE chip. HPE is the only server manufacturer in the world that actually owns and creates its own silicon. We have our own plants in Taiwan, in the Czech Republic, in Mexico, and we actually have a server manufacturing product line here in the United States. We are the only server manufacturer in the world that can tell you your server can be created entirely in the United States. And I think that made in the USA supply chain is going to become more and more important as we go forward. So we can actually secure it from cradle to grave. In addition, not only do we check this at boot, which is what our competitor does, we actually check these, the firmware, the BIOS, and the bootloader while your server is running. Now, I don't know about you, but I would hate to reboot my server and just to make sure that there wasn't something malicious running inside of my BIOS or my bootloader. So we actually have a product called ILO Advanced that plugs into all of our servers and checks them at a tunable time. The default is 24 hours, but I know some companies have turned up that check to being every hour or every 2 hours. That may add a little bit of overhead, but it's not a huge amount. And we think that's a big differentiator between the HPE server and our competitor. In addition, we've worked with Intel and AMD to take this same level of security, not just from the firmware and the bootloader, but actually take it into the VM. So now we can actually give a hardened hypervisor. And so when I was talking about earlier, a lot of the server products only come down to the VM. We can actually secure the hypervisor, both from the Intel standpoint, as well as our new AMD EPYC solutions. So we can secure your memory as well. So data in RAM, data in virtualization, as well as that secure processor. And we think that gives us a very tight security mechanism all the way through the boot stack. Now, what's going to also start happening is that HPE wants to take this same security and take it further up the stack into more of the operating system. We want to take it into firmware options. So if you have a network card or you have a video card that's installed inside of an HPE server, we want to be able to make sure that those haven't been intruded upon as well. And if we don't think that happens, I just want to call back to, we had about a year and a half ago, ASUS got hit. And what happened is that a malicious hacker was able to get into their software downloader and actually install a remote access tool through their software downloader. This security would detect that and actually help us give you good options. So what happens when we detect something malicious? 3 choices. 1, go to the last known good. 2, go to the defaults when it came from the factory. And number 3, freeze the server. Why would you want to freeze the server? Because sometimes you might want to do forensics on that server and determine how the attack occurred and what things may have happened. That's very common in the defense industry. In addition, we have a thing called InfoSight, which is a predictive analytics model that goes across all of our servers and gives us some analytics as to what we think will go wrong next. What we do with this is that we do global learning. So this InfoSight product plugs into InfoSight instances around the world and starts giving us an idea of what if there's a new attack vector that deploys in, let's say, Eastern Europe, and we have HPE servers deployed there. We can actually learn from those analytics and feed those analytics into your InfoSight product and help you be better hardened for those attacks coming forth. The reason we need to be there, and I'll talk about the same thing with user behavioral analytics, is a lot of the attacks we see in the United States first were deployed outside the United States. So it's very important to make sure that we have sort of an international inventory of products and reports about what's going wrong. So when you look at the implementation guide for Silicon Rooted Trust, which is kind of the Gen 10, Gen 10 and Gen 10 Plus, which is starting to be deployed here pretty soon, are available in our server lines, also involved in some of our VM hosts like the SimpliVity product or our Edgeline servers, which are being deployed closer to the edge. Based on that, and this is now, I want you to understand this slide is not something we produced. We took our server out to a third party and said, we want you to evaluate our server against Dell, Cisco, and Lenovo and tell us what you think about our security. The results from that particular testing said that we were 2 generations ahead of any server at that time. This was 2018 or 17, I believe, when we did this testing. So right now we are continuing with this. We have our servers being tested again to make sure that we still have a competitive edge. But they came back to us with these things and said, these are where we are ahead of all of our competitors. So we truly believe in it. Now, in addition, I said that there was a second kind of fork of HPE, and that's the ARUBA model. So ARUBA is a HPE company, and ARUBA has a thing called, they have a zero trust model using their ClearPass product. And I think that's a fascinating product because this product and ARUBA ESP will actually help push security to the edge. And I was actually watching some videos about this because this is a new announcement. But what we can do is, with ARUBA ESP, is if you have workers working from home, we can actually deploy a gateway to your home users that they can plug into their network that will actually secure that network all the way into your environment. And I think that's fascinating because now I don't have to worry about any sort of strange configurations. I don't have to worry about trying to walk someone at home through how to set these kind of things up. But that product will then help us do discovery of those endpoints. And so I talked about earlier the idea of home networks being a huge security vulnerability. but now I have custom device discovery and profiling. I could do authentication and build policy enforcement based upon what I see and how I want to handle those particular products. I can access control, and I can do it all contextually. And I think the ARUBA product is a great offering going forward. And so I think you're going to hear a whole lot more about that as well. I talked a little bit earlier about Ezmeral. Like I said, new software portfolio. I think there's a lot of great opportunity here from an AI and machine learning and data analytics. So if you're looking at doing IT transformations going forward, take a look at this. I think we're going to have a lot of opportunity. And in the upper left corner, we look at the idea of security and Spiffy and Spire. And that comes from an acquisition. We acquired a company in February called Cytail. And Cytail felt that there was not a lot of security at the edge, especially when we're looking at APIs. And if you know what I'm talking about with APIs, a lot of APIs have a password or an access code hard-coded into them, which makes them somewhat of a security vulnerability. So what Spiffy and Spire do is they kind of use those APIs, but actually help secure them better and also do it at a faster pace. So I think there's a lot of opportunity going forward with the Ezmeral portfolio. Another thing I'm very excited about, and if you don't get it, I'm very excited about cybersecurity, is a couple of years ago, a company called Pensando was founded by John Chambers, who's the former Cisco CEO. And what John Chambers said is that as we push data further to the edge, how do we secure that data? We want to make sure that all of my servers are secured, but do I want to pay for a new firewall every time I expand? And so instead what he did was they came up with the idea of taking a full stateful firewall, putting it inside of a PCIe network card, and making sure that that card is centrally managed so that I can create one policy and push that one policy out to every one of our products. So we thought that was a great thing. We have become a major partner with Pensando. Our CTO, our worldwide CTO, actually sits on the board of directors. And the Pensando cards are now being deployed inside of HPE servers. And I think as these network cards become have more features added to them, the Pensando messaging is going to be something you're going to hear a whole lot more about over the next 18 months. So we are not a sole source, but we do have early access to the Pensando cards. And like I said, as of June 1, those cards are being deployed. In addition, cyber insurance, I think you understood what I talked about earlier, that cyber insurance is crucially important. So the other thing we wanted to do is HPE felt that our product should actually help reduce cyber risk. But we aren't really a risk company, right? That's not one of our ideas. So instead what we did is we went to Marsh Insurance, which is a major insurance provider, and said, how would you feel if do you feel that certain products help reduce cyber risk? And so Marsh came up with a program called Cyber Catalyst. And so in 2019, they asked for 150 products to be submitted to them for evaluation. And of those 150 products, 17 were deemed to have a meaningful impact on cyber risk. We are the only server manufacturer that was recognized by Marsh Insurance. The Silicon Rooted Trust is recognized as one of these solutions. In addition, the ARUBA Policy Enforcement Firewall is one of those 17. So we feel that's another differentiator in that we are recognized by the insurance industry as being a product that actually has a meaningful impact on cyber risk. So all of those kind of encapsulate the HPE holistic approach to security. We want to help you make those transformations. And one of the ways we do that is through partnerships with companies like WEI, because we really do feel like, we don't want you to be able to do these things on your own, or we want to help you transform. I mean, you can do them on your own, but why not make sure that you have a trusted partner that can help you transform correctly and more securely. So in addition, and this is where I will end, HPE offers a free server security and wellness workshop. So the next one is July 9th. This is a 3-hour workshop where we go into a much deeper dive into how our how our servers actually add to security, how our InfoSight works, how ILO Advanced works, and how Cyber Catalyst can help you actually improve your cyber insurance. So we welcome you to either contact me or contact HPE or contact WEI, and we can make sure we can get you into these classes. Because we really do believe, first of all, it's free. We do like free, but we really do believe it'd be a good use of your time. With that, that is the end of my formal presentation. Do you have any questions for me? You can actually ask whatever you would like. I'll try to answer them as we go.
Well, it's a little quiet, James, so I'll ask one.
I always feel like when I hear that quiet that, did I lose it? I've actually had that happen where I was just chirping along, and then somebody was like, we lost you about 5 minutes ago, derp. You know, so.
Yeah, right. No one had the call to tell you. So, I mean, I guess, you know, any good FBI stories? Let me start with that, right? I mean,
a lot.
The first time I saw your bio, I was like, man, you must have seen some things in your day, especially the early days of cybersecurity, some of the more aggressive threats or things that you were a part of. Anything you can share?
Yeah, I mean, so my last 8 years, I worked specifically cybercrime, but I was also, so when I was in the Bureau 97 to 2004, we didn't really have security officers, right? I mean, that was the days before. So I was an ISO, and so I maintained the security network across the entire New Mexico area. I was in Albuquerque for my first 14 years. And so it's very interesting watching where things have gone. I worked national security, I worked cybercrime, I worked the Houston Astros, the St. Louis Cardinals intrusion into the Houston Astros network, which was not really a hack, it was more of a improper access where somebody gave up their password. But I'm always fascinated by, I mean, honestly, I get up every morning and I say, what's the most recent hack? And I read through it and I blog about it, but I'm always fascinated how so many of the attacks we see are really not high tech. It's things like really bad passwords. And we saw that with, you know, Equifax, where they had an admin account. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I think I walked around the halls for like a week just chirping about it. It's so much of what we do from a security standpoint is just really about, you know, are we learning lessons? Are we learning lessons from other people in the same verticals? So I had a company call me here in town, and they said, yeah, we got hit with ransomware. And I was like, okay, so what happened? They said, well, about 6 months ago, we got hit with ransomware, and we paid the ransom. I was like, okay, well, that's your choice. Paid the ransom, but we didn't reload anything. And I started shaking my head because I know where this is going. And he goes, 4 months later, we got hit again. I was like, right, because once you pay the ransom, they know you're willing to pay money to get your data back. You've proven that you are, you know, that desperate. And if you haven't changed any security, which they hadn't changed any security in that 4 months, they found themselves reinfected. That's the world we live in, because even if you decide to pay that ransom, there's nothing to stop them from staying in your network. You're going to have to reload everything. And so one of the other great stories is there was a casino that got hit. And the casino got hit with ransomware. They decided not to pay the ransom, and they reloaded their entire system. They were down for about 7-8 days, I believe, if that was what I heard. And as they were reloading the system, they started to go back into operation. They were reinfected. They were like, wow, what happened? We missed something. So they did it again, reloaded, reinfected. Turns out that the ransomware was stored in a thermostat inside of a huge saltwater tank. And that's the reality of where the criminals are going. They know you're going to reload computers. They know you're going to reload servers. So they're going to go in your printers, they're going to go in your routers, and they're going to go in any IoT device that they think you could find. So you've got to reload everything as it goes forward, which can be extremely problematic. I'll finish with one other story, because people love stories. I had a large company here in town, contacted me and they said, hey, James, and actually the guy calls me Jim, which I don't go by Jim, but hey, you know, he's a friend. I said, what's up? He goes, we have a Chinese hacker in our network. I was like, okay. He goes, what do we do? I was like, you kick him out. He goes, that easy? I said, no, it's not that easy. I said, they'll be back in 6 to 10 days, and then they're going to be back again in 12 to 15 months. He goes, how do you know that? Trust me. 7 days later, I get a phone call. They're back in our network. I was like, yep. I said, so let me figure out what you did. So when you knew somebody was in your network, you sent out an email asking everyone to change their passwords. He goes, yep. I said, do you not think that the person is reading your emails? So what you did is you told them you were changing passwords, and you told them what the temporary password was on the accounts. So they actually found a user account that was not being used, changed all those passwords, and they just reinfected after that. Wow. Okay, so you've got to have a secondary way of communicating with your employees when you know that an attack has occurred. Okay, 12 months later, they call me back, they go, okay, what's going on here? I said, here's what happened. You told people to change their passwords last year, and they changed them, but then a year later, guess what? People are using a cyclical password thing. They change that password they'll say, dog, $123. The next time it'll be, cat, $123. They're following a 4 password routine. Somebody changed their password back to the same password they had a year before they got back in your system. So we have to know that if you know that you've been intruded upon, all of those passwords have to be kicked out of the system and never used again. But even basic things like I talked about, intrusion response plans, backups, and test your backups, make sure they work. Multi-factor authentication at every opportunity. Password managers, require the use of password managers, things like that. Evaluate email and how you use email. Email can't be trusted. So all of these things are things that we need to just have built in, and they're not technology ideas, right? So that's why one of the things I've continued to do, even working for HPE, on the side, I still go out and talk to companies about just general cybersecurity. No product, no, I'm not going to push anything, because we have to start doing everything we can to be better about what we're doing. And so security is all about taking positive steps towards that. So, sorry, long-winded answer to a short question.
That was good. Any other questions from the group? Just throw it out there.
If you do have questions along the way, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can definitely come and follow me on LinkedIn. I try to stay relevant, kind of keep the brain going. I'm one of those early risers. I've probably had 3 cups of coffee by the time 7 o'clock rolls around. And we've got to have better conversations about cybersecurity. So if you have any questions in the future, you can reach out to me at HPE, or you can reach out to me through LinkedIn. But I really do want to help companies be more secure. And that's why I think, working with, us and WEI is just something we have to do.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, James. Yes, that's great. We'll give it another minute if anybody has any questions, but I'll go ahead and move to the WEI slide. And Shane, if you want to say any words on this one, I think that would be great. And if we get any questions afterwards, we'll be able to allow for people to come off mute before we end the session.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, again, I recognize a lot of the names that are on the call today, and I want to thank you for your time. You know who we are. You know who we're here to help. We continue to invest, right? I mean, in the last 3 months, we've had an opportunity to kind of look at who we are and what we're doing, we've been doubling down, right? I mean, we've been hiring as fast as we can, good talent, network and security talent, quite frankly, and we continue to invest in this time. So. I understand there's a lot of difficulties out there economically, business-wise, and just rest assured that we continue to invest and we continue to be strong and do the things we can to help our partners and our customers. So if there's anything you need, any flexibility, anything like that, that's what we're focused on today and moving forward through the rest of this year. So I'm glad everyone's safe. I'm glad everybody took the time today. Hope lunch was good, if you got it. Just thank you. And I'll open up to any questions. Blake must have a question if he's still awake. Just saying.
Hopefully I didn't make anybody go to sleep. That's when I know I'm not doing my job.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and move to the thank you slide and go ahead and close out today's session. If there are any questions for James or Shane, we will go ahead and get you that contact information. As you can see, Shane is listed here, as well as WEI's website. We really appreciate, again, to echo Shane's comments, you for joining. And again, we are looking forward to the next time we can all talk. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.